I have been tracking the military balance in the Persian Gulf for more than 15 years, and I have never witnessed a moment quite like what just unfolded between Tehran and Washington. Something happened in the past 72 hours that no analyst predicted, that no intelligence briefing anticipated, and that no Iranian general thought possible. Iran did the unthinkable. It announced publicly and on state television that it had launched ballistic missiles at a United States military base. And the Pentagon's response was not what anyone in Tehran, Riyadh, Moscow, or Beijing expected. The provocation was expected. The escalation rhetoric was expected. The state media celebration parading missile trails across Iranian television screens was expected. But what happened inside the Pentagon Situation Room in the hours that followed, and what American forces did in response, was never supposed to be possible. Iranian commanders believed they had calculated the American response with precision. They were wrong, catastrophically, irreversibly wrong. And what the United States did next has already rewritten the rules of engagement across the entire Middle East. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit the subscribe button. Turn on notifications immediately. What unfolds inside the Strait of Hormuz in the coming days will change everything we thought we knew about the balance of power in the Persian Gulf. In the next few minutes, this analysis will show exactly how a desperate Iranian gambit triggered a calculated American counterstrike, how the Pentagon's measured response exposed the structural collapse of the Islamic Republic's deterrent capability, and why the next 48 to 72 hours represent the most dangerous window in the region since 1979. This is not speculation. This is documented reality, and it is unfolding right now. To understand why this moment is so historically significant, the analysis must first go back to 1979. For more than 4 decades, the Islamic Republic built its entire identity on one unbreakable promise to its population and to the world. That promise was simple: Iran would never be humiliated again. Every sanction, every assassination, every covert operation, every diplomatic isolation was absorbed by the regime and repackaged as proof of its divine resilience. The Supreme Leader's office spent decades constructing a narrative in which Iran stood as the only nation in the region willing to confront American power directly. That narrative required one essential ingredient. It required the appearance of credible military deterrence. For years, that deterrence rested on 3 pillars. The first pillar was the ballistic missile arsenal, which Iranian commanders boasted could strike any American base from Bahrain to Qatar to the United Arab Emirates within minutes. According to assessments published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, Iran possessed the largest ballistic missile inventory in the Middle East, with credible estimates ranging from 3,000 to over 3,500 deployed systems. The second pillar was the proxy network, a sophisticated architecture of regional militias, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Houthis in Yemen to the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, all coordinated through the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force. The third pillar was the choke point leverage, the perpetual threat that Iran could close the Strait of Hormuz and choke off 20% of global oil supply, sending crude prices to $200 per barrel and crashing the global economy. For decades, this 3-pillar deterrent worked. American administrations from Carter through Biden treated Iran with a caution that the regime's actual conventional military capability did not justify. Tehran understood this. Tehran exploited this. And Tehran became addicted to the leverage that this perceived deterrent provided. But something changed beginning in late 2024 and accelerating through the first half of 2026. The proxy network collapsed in slow motion. Hezbollah's senior command was systematically eliminated in a sequence of Israeli operations that destroyed the organization's communication infrastructure and decapitated its leadership. The Assad regime in Syria, Iran's critical land bridge to the Mediterranean, fell in a matter of weeks in December of 2024. The Houthis suffered sustained American and British air operations that degraded their offensive capability, and the Iraqi militias found themselves increasingly constrained by a Baghdad government that no longer wished to serve as Tehran's proxy battlefield. The first pillar was crumbling. The second pillar was already gone. This is the context in which Iranian commanders made the decision that defined this week. With proxies destroyed and economic conditions inside Iran approaching catastrophic levels, the regime needed to demonstrate that the missile pillar remained credible. The Supreme Leader's office, increasingly isolated and reportedly receiving conflicting intelligence from competing factions within the IRGC, authorized what Iranian state media described as a measured but unmistakable strike on American military infrastructure. The target was selected, the launch sequence was prepared, and in the early morning hours of this week, Iran did what it had threatened to do for 45 years. It fired ballistic missiles at an American base. What happened next forms the first war in this unfolding crisis. Chapter 1. The strike itself and the information warfare that followed. Iranian state television announced within minutes of the launch that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had successfully targeted an American forward operating position with what they described as a precision ballistic missile strike. The footage was dramatic. The narration was triumphant. The regime's spokesman claimed devastating damage, significant American casualties, and a restored deterrent credibility that would force Washington to reconsider its entire posture in the Gulf. The performance was theatrical, calculated, and aimed squarely at the domestic Iranian audience and the broader regional population that had begun to question whether the regime retained any military capability worth fearing. But the reality on the ground was profoundly different from the Iranian narrative. According to multiple Pentagon sources cited by Reuters and confirmed by independent reporting from the Wall Street Journal, the actual outcome of the strike bore no resemblance to the regime's claims. American early warning systems detected the launches within seconds of ignition. Integrated air defense networks tracked each missile from boost phase through mid-course. Patriot batteries and terminal high-altitude area defense systems, positioned across the region in a layered defensive architecture that had been quietly upgraded over the previous 18 months, engaged the inbound threats with surgical precision. According to defense officials speaking to the Associated Press, the interception rate approached or exceeded 90%. The missiles that did impact struck unoccupied perimeter zones that American commanders had cleared in anticipation of exactly this type of attack. 0 American fatalities, minimal infrastructure damage, and a complete intelligence picture of Iran's missile launch signatures, telemetry, guidance characteristics, and operational command structure now in the hands of United States Central Command. The Iranian regime had not restored its deterrent. It had inadvertently provided the Pentagon with the most comprehensive real-time data set on Iranian ballistic missile capability ever collected. Every launch site was now geolocated. Every command node that authorized the strike was now identified. Every supply chain element that supported the operation was now mapped. The strike that was supposed to reestablish Iranian credibility had instead exposed every operational vulnerability in the Iranian missile program. This is where the Pentagon's response shocked everyone, because what Washington did next was not what Tehran expected. Chapter 2. The Calculated American Counterstroke. For nearly 12 hours after the Iranian strike, the Pentagon said almost nothing. No press conference, no emergency address from the president, no theatrical condemnation, just silence. Inside Tehran, this silence was interpreted by some commanders as evidence that the strike had succeeded in deterring an American response. According to reporting from the Financial Times citing regional intelligence sources, senior IRGC officials began circulating internal memoranda claiming victory and arguing that Iran had restored its position. They were celebrating in the very moment that American forces were finalizing the response that would expose this celebration as catastrophically premature. When the response came, it came with the kind of overwhelming precision that has defined modern American military doctrine since Operation Desert Storm. According to defense officials cited by CNN and Bloomberg, the United States conducted coordinated strikes against a carefully selected target set inside Iranian territory and Iranian-controlled positions in Iraq and Syria. The targets were not symbolic, they were structural. Ballistic missile production facilities, IRGC command and control nodes, specific drone manufacturing sites that had been supplying both Iranian forces and proxy networks. Intelligence centers responsible for coordinating the very strike Iran had just conducted. The operation employed what defense analysts describe as a sophisticated combination of standoff weapons launched from beyond Iranian air defense range. B-2 Spirit strategic bombers, capable of penetrating defended airspace with stealth characteristics that Iranian radar architectures cannot effectively counter, delivered massive ordnance penetrators against hardened underground facilities. Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from Navy surface combatants in the Arabian Sea struck softer targets with precision guidance that minimized collateral damage. F-35 fighters operating from undisclosed locations provided suppression of enemy air defenses, neutralizing Iranian S-300 systems before they could engage the strike package. The asymmetry between the two operations was the entire point. Iran launched ballistic missiles in a theatrical performance aimed at domestic propaganda. The United States conducted a calculated, integrated, multi-platform strike that systematically degraded Iranian offensive capability. Tehran wanted optics. Washington delivered consequences. And the gap between those two approaches revealed everything about the current military balance in the region. But the damage went much deeper than the immediate physical destruction, because what happened next exposed something far more dangerous for the Iranian regime than the loss of any single facility. Chapter 3. The strategic collapse of Iranian deterrent credibility. The third war is the war on Iranian credibility itself. For 4.5 decades, the Islamic Republic survived not through actual military superiority, but through the perception that confronting Iran would be more costly than tolerating Iran. That perception is now collapsing in real time, and the collapse is being measured in markets, in diplomatic chambers, and in the strategic calculations of every regional capital from Riyadh to Abu Dhabi to Tel Aviv to Ankara. Consider what the regional response revealed. According to reporting from the Wall Street Journal, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates did not invoke any of the contingency protocols that Iranian planners had assumed would constrain American military action. Qatar, despite hosting Al Udeid Air Base and maintaining diplomatic channels with Tehran, provided no public objection to the American response. Iraq's prime minister issued the kind of carefully measured statement that signaled exactly nothing in terms of actual constraint on American operations. Even the historically cautious Sultanate of Oman, traditionally Iran's diplomatic backchannel to Washington, declined to publicly defend the Iranian position. The regional consensus that Iranian planners had relied upon for decades simply did not materialize. The Gulf states had concluded, through careful observation of the past 18 months, that Iran no longer possessed the capability to impose meaningful costs on those who aligned against it. The Abraham Accords architecture, expanded through quiet diplomacy and emerging economic integration between Israel and the Gulf monarchies, provided a structural alternative to the Iranian-led resistance axis. The regional order that Tehran had spent decades trying to disrupt had quietly reformed itself in Iran's absence, and the markets confirmed what the diplomats demonstrated. Oil prices, which Iranian commanders had threatened could spike to $200 per barrel in response to any conflict, instead moved in a narrow range that reflected complete market confidence in American capability to manage the situation. According to data from Bloomberg, Brent crude moved less than $4 in the immediate aftermath of the strike exchange before settling back into its prior trading range. The choke point leverage, the third pillar of Iranian deterrent, had been priced out of existence. Traders no longer believed Iran could close the Strait of Hormuz. The threat that had defined regional risk premiums for 40 years had evaporated. This brings the analysis to an even more critical question. What does the regime do now? Chapter 4. The internal crisis inside Tehran. Behind the public theater of resistance and defiance, the situation inside the Iranian political system is approaching levels of stress that have not been seen since the 2009 Green Movement or the 2022 protests following the death of Mahsa Amini. According to credible reporting from Iran International and corroborated by independent regional analysts at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, internal factional disputes within the IRGC have reached a level of intensity that is now spilling into public visibility. The faction that authorized the strike, associated with hardline commanders who believed a demonstration of capability would restore deterrent credibility, is now under sustained criticism from a competing faction that argued for strategic patience. Senior clerical figures, increasingly nervous about the trajectory of the Supreme Leader's succession and the legitimacy of the entire revolutionary project, have begun making public statements that subtly distance themselves from the operational decisions of recent days. The Speaker of the Majlis, whose position has historically required careful balance between competing power centers, has reportedly convened closed sessions that suggest growing parliamentary discomfort with the direction of national security policy. And below the elite level, the Iranian population is responding in ways that should terrify the regime. According to reporting from multiple sources inside Iran, protests have erupted in Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, and Mashhad. The protesters are not the typical reformist students of previous cycles. They include working-class Iranians whose economic situation has deteriorated to the point of subsistence crisis. The Iranian rial has collapsed to historic lows against the dollar. Bread prices have surged, fuel rationing has intensified, and the population is increasingly unwilling to accept that their suffering is the necessary cost of a resistance project that delivers nothing but further isolation and escalating military risk. The regime's response, predictably, has been to deploy the Basij paramilitary forces against the protesters, while simultaneously attempting to control information flow through internet restrictions and targeted arrests of journalists and activists. But these measures, effective in previous cycles, are showing diminishing returns. The information environment inside Iran has fundamentally changed. Citizens access satellite news, use VPNs to circumvent internet restrictions, and increasingly trust foreign sources over state media. The regime can suppress protests in any single location, but it cannot suppress the underlying recognition that the entire strategic project has failed. This perfect storm of military exposure, regional isolation, economic collapse, and internal political fracture has created something far more dangerous than any single crisis the Islamic Republic has previously faced. These are not separate issues. They feed into each other in a compounding cycle that accelerates with every passing day. The military exposure emboldens regional adversaries. Regional isolation accelerates economic collapse. Economic collapse intensifies internal political fracture. Internal political fracture pressures the regime toward further military adventurism to demonstrate continued strength. And at the center of this storm sits the supreme leader, who has been almost completely invisible in public for the past several weeks, while his subordinates fight over the trajectory of the response. This is the reality of Iran in 2026. Not one crisis, but 4 overlapping wars destroying the system from every direction at once. The war for military credibility, lost. The war for regional alignment, lost. The war for economic survival, intensifying. The war for internal legitimacy, accelerating toward an inflection point that the regime may not survive. According to credible analysis from multiple intelligence-adjacent sources cited by the Financial Times and the Washington Post, the Islamic Republic now has only a 10 to 15-day window before the convergence of these pressures forces a decision point that the regime cannot avoid. Within that window, the leadership must choose. Either it dramatically de-escalates and accepts a humiliating negotiating posture that exposes the failure of the entire strategic project, or it doubles down with further military action that risks an American response designed not to deter, but to dismantle. There is no middle path. There is no return to the previous status quo. The strike that was supposed to restore Iranian credibility has instead accelerated the collapse of every pillar that supported the regime's regional position. Every single day this situation continues, Iran is not only losing its current strategic assets, it is permanently destroying its future capability to project power. Each missile fired exposes more of the inventory. Each command node activated reveals more of the operational architecture. Each diplomatic appeal that fails further confirms the regional isolation. The damage is structural. The damage is irreversible. There is no going back to the calculated ambiguity that defined Iranian deterrent for 45 years. The countdown has begun, and it is being measured in hours rather than weeks. American carrier strike groups are positioned in the Arabian Sea with capabilities that exceed anything Iran can credibly counter. Israeli intelligence services, having spent years preparing for exactly this scenario, possess targeting packages of remarkable depth and specificity. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have quietly aligned their defensive postures in ways that close off Iranian operational options that were available even 6 months ago. And inside Iran, the regime's own population is increasingly unwilling to absorb additional sacrifice for a strategic project that has manifestly failed. The next 48 to 72 hours will reveal whether the regime chooses survival through retreat or destruction through further escalation. Either path leads to outcomes that fundamentally rewrite the strategic map of the Middle East. And the consequences will extend far beyond the immediate region, reaching into energy markets, supply chains, and the broader structure of American global power projection that has defined the international system since 1945. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications. This analysis will continue tracking every major development in this rapidly evolving crisis as it unfolds across the coming days. The decisions being made inside Tehran, inside Washington, inside Jerusalem, and inside Riyadh in the next 72 hours will determine the trajectory of the entire region for the next generation. And this channel will be there to provide the depth of analysis that mainstream coverage simply cannot deliver. Hit the notification bell and select all notifications. Developments in this situation will not wait for convenient publishing windows. When the next critical update breaks, viewers with notifications enabled will be the first to receive comprehensive analysis. Those without notifications will be reading about events hours or days after they unfold, missing the window when understanding actually matters. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Here is the question every analyst is asking right now. Will the Iranian regime choose to de-escalate and accept a humiliating negotiating posture in the coming days? Or will it double down with further military action that invites a decisive American response designed to dismantle rather than deter? Type de-escalate or double down in the comments and explain your reasoning. Every single comment is read, and the most insightful analyses from this community will inform future coverage of this rapidly evolving situation. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, stay ahead of the headlines, and watch for the next brief as this crisis continues to unfold in real time.